Well, I got just to change the subject back to the fact the medium we're all using, because I happened to be in the company of much younger people last week because I had a family event, and something came up about podcasting.
Oh,
and my sister said, "Oh, your uncle does a podcast on." I said, "Oh yes, I do a podcast." And my nephew was like, "Oh, how do you sort of get in touch with each other?" And I went, "Oh, by Skype." And he looked at me as if I'd sort of said something from some like esoteric text. I was like, "What the hell is that?" But,
what
Skype.
is that?
Like, no idea. Is that that must be an old thing? I
mean, that is
fantastic,
it is. Isn't it? It's
one notch up from carrier pigeon.
I
know. I just love the fact we're at that place now, where there are iterations and strata of the internet. Yeah. So you could have nostalgia about versions of the internet now. I mean that does make one feel old, doesn't it?
There was something like 2 generations or 3 generations of birds common to this country that were mimicking dial-up back in the day. And of course, once dial-up stopped,
of course,
so did they doing it. But you could hear birds trilling that ang, 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 because they were hearing it through the windows of people living in towns and cities and villages. And it's that.
So rude, doesn't it? I mean, like, you couldn't use the phone.
No,
you couldn't use the phone when you're on the internet, and they used to charge you by the minute, like a call.
Yeah, and my first package, it was BT, and it would chuck you off every 2 hours.
Yeah, I remember that so well. Oh,
trying to download even basic Flash animation. Yeah. You're like there for a year.
Like even like still pictures, still images, right? It took forever. Tiny, grainy little videos of old cartoons or old children.
Welcome to the retirement home in Baltimore.
Yeah.
Where 3 very old men are gathered around their Skypes.
I remember when you could only upload videos that were 10 minutes long to YouTube.
And then it goes crashing into the Yorkshireman sketch. You were lucky. We didn't have anything. We didn't even know what a JPEG was.
YouTube luxury. It were Newgrounds for us. Oh my God, the days of like the original internet animators. Like on Newgrounds that used to use Flash animation and whatnot.
But aren't we thankful for way back when now that huge amounts of information are just suddenly vanishing off websites? Yeah. The old way back when machine is taking a real beating this month, doesn't it?
Oh, that makes me sad.
And the Internet Archive. Shout out for the Internet Archive.
Yes, love it.
Which we love
it to bits.
Yeah.
How can you not?
Still surviving, still hanging in there.
It's doing all right. I mean, Internet Archive is hanging on. I don't know how it does because, there is quite a lot of copyright infringing stuff on.
I think once they hit upon the idea, we're basically a library for people who can't get to a library. It's like it helped a lot with the rhetoric.
It's framing, isn't it? It's all framing. Everything is framing, basically.
But I thought that was pretty good, to be fair.
Awesome. Well, we're back. We're back in, as you said earlier, we're back into Baltimore.
We're back in the retirement home.
I'm going to call them episodes 4 and 5 because I can't pronounce the titles of these ones.
I could try, but it would probably be racist. So
that's the thing. I'm very sort of conscious of the fact
don't get me started on this because I've been doing prepping an audiobook, huge thing about the Boer War. Not war. The Boer Wall is something else, but the Boer War, and huge chunks of it are written in a kind of defunct 19th century Afrikaans.
Brilliant.
And I had literally no resource to go to know how to pronounce any of this. And there's been no one to help me. And at the very last moment when I started to really panic, the brilliant Vicky, my partner, came out and said, I think I work with someone who might be able to help.
Oh, no.
Take a photograph of all the pages, and I will see if he would mind basically recording the pronunciations.
Oh, that
And he saved my bacon. But the fascinating thing about it was the conversation we had about it as well, because he did it for me in good grace, and bought him a very, very big bar of Toblerone because that's his favourite product placement. And because I said, look, what can I get you? Can I get you a bottle of something? I get it. He said, no, I really love Toblerone. I went, well, I'll get you the biggest bar of Toblerone I can find.
the one you can effectively bludgeon people to death with.
That's the one. That's the one.
Yeah.
But it just funny. He said, my grandparents can still speak this. But of course, it is the language of oppression, he said. So obviously, subsequent generations have, rejected it. But even he was finding some of it a bit difficult. He said, "Okay, I've just got to get into. I've just got to sort of hear my grandparents in my head.
It's the groove of it, yeah."
Yeah, but I mean, I would have been so stuck. I don't know what we would have done. I mean, I guess we would have had to go to the publishers and say, well, unless you can actually dig someone up who specializes in this dialect, I've got no chance. So, but there you go.
Probably more people who speak like Tolkien's Elvish languages.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, more people can speak Klingon than this particular Afrikaans dialect. And then, of course, it's getting the accent right. And like Jack says, I'm always so mindful in these kinds of audiobooks, because ultimately it can only ever be one reader unless they have a big budget, and sometimes they bring in various people. So you're very aware of like how much do you want really, and how much should we go near, all these questions. And of course the time spent trying to answer them is never enough. But you just sort of hope,
Yeah, with these, I'm not even going to attempt it. I'm just not going to bother, to be honest. Episode 4 and 5. That's why. Go read if you're listening to this. Yeah, go and look at the title, and you can see what they are. I mean, it's up there in the bar. I mean, the first one, episode 4. I don't know why. I'm always shocked when I come back to it, because in my mind, I always assume that it's another one of the filler episodes. That it's another one of the serial killer of the week episodes, and it's not. It's not. There's so much packed into it.
It does a very interesting
kind of pretends to be, doesn't it?
Yes, it really does.
The show's being very self-reflexive now, because it started out, as we've said many times, doing this pretense of being CSI Baltimore and having serial killer of the week episodes, and now it's sort of riffing on that.
It's riffing
about
on
itself,
it,
isn't it?
Yeah,
it's totally saying, we're doing a serial killer of the week. No, we're not, actually.
We're really not. No. In fact, the serial killers of the week are now becoming metaphorical reflections of what's happening in the rest, with the core cast. That's all they are now. They're so metaphorical and so abstract that they're becoming almost fantastical now. I mean, we had the guy, we had the guy with the mushrooms in series 1. That was pretty fantastical. This, the beehives. That,
my theory is that Hannibal must be acting by this point as a kind of murderous art generator. He is like a force so powerful that it gets other people involved in sort of these grisly art installations. So he's obviously extending some kind of field or curse into Baltimore.
We've spoken about this in previous episodes, the notion of Hannibal basically being like a kind of author or writer within this space who is writing the universe. And that almost seems to be what's happening. This particular serial killer is very interesting because she doesn't have much screen time at all. She's very little screen time, and that's very, very, very deliberate. There's no ums or ahs about it. She was never meant to have any more screen time than she has. But she, of course, reflects in what she's doing, what's happening with Bella, and so many other things as well. She believes that she's giving peace to people, that she's taking away their pain. And in fact, she has that great line where I took away their pain, and that's beautiful.
Of course, the link between the two halves of that, of course, is the whole issue of consent, because neither Hannibal and Catherine operate with consent, and that's the wickedness, that's the evil.
That's the wickedness. Absolutely. I mean, it's infinitely more wicked in this episode on Hannibal's part, of course. I mean, this is one of the episodes where you do, if you built up sympathy for Hannibal, or if you built up a connection with Hannibal, this is one where it severs quite profoundly. because you see what a spirit of abandon he actually is, where everything is arbitrary. It's like when there's that sequence where he's talking. There are two actually in this episode where he's talking with Bella, where he's doing a therapy session with her, and they are discussing the nature of death and the imminence of death. And for her, of course, it is this phenomenally immediate and profound thing, and she's expressing her fear, her ultimate fear, which is not of death but is of indignity. Which I think that's a brilliant observation. I think that's true of almost all of us, quite frankly. I think that's when people say they're afraid of death, a lot of the time, I think that's more what they mean. They're afraid of indignity and they're afraid of the pain that leads up to the event. But Hannibal is enjoying the theater of it. In Bella, he loves seeing people in extremis, does Hannibal. He sees art in it. He sees poetry and meaning in it. It doesn't matter what extremis it is. It can be an extremis of love or of inspiration, but he does like those states of extremis where people are being broken down, where their assumptions of who they are, or the way they market themselves to the world, the masks they wear are being taken away. So you get something really pure underneath, even if they have to be flayed to reach it. And that's what's happening to Bella, of course. The cancer is taking away every affectation and contrivance of her life and leaving something bizarrely pure from Hannibal's perspective. And that's what he's taking pleasure in, is the way she's wrestling with the imminence and immediacy of it. And that coin flip, I mean, fucking Jesus, that is the most, I think that may be the wickedest, that is the most Luciferian evil you see from Hannibal. Probably in the entire series.
I got real whiplash with this episode because, as I've said many times in previous episodes, you do have this obscure feeling that Hannibal is somehow on our side, and in the deeper sort of wider sense, if we're talking about humanism, I stand by that. But it's a good reminder. It's a bit of a slap in the face, of which there is one in this episode. It's a bit of a slap in the face for the audience as well, as if to say, yeah, don't get too fond of him. Don't mistake the wider meaning of what he is for himself, because he himself is absolutely profoundly wicked. And I think taking away Bella's suicide, the dignified, self-chosen way she makes her exit, I think doing that is probably the most monstrously evil thing he does in the entire show. It
feels like a double murder almost, doesn't it? It feels like a double murder on the same person.
Yeah. Really does.
And yet, weirdly, I think the coin toss is, as you say, incredibly callous and inhuman. But in his mind, I read that as a concession to kindness, because he will very much want to not lose Bella, because he finds Bella absolutely fascinating. He wants to sit and watch her, and he wants to sit and watch her die. So she is dying in front of him. She's committed suicide. She's taken the overdose of the painkiller, morphine. His instinct is probably going to be to just immediately bring her back because he wants her, but he does leave it up to chance. He does leave it up to a coin flip, and that's probably about as kind as he is capable of being. I will give her a chance of escaping.
It brings me back round to that view that of which I've mentioned before, about how reactive he is more than proactive. Yes. Unlike Catherine in this episode, he has no interest in playing God, but he is a kind of nasty trickster. I mean, as I say, I agree with you. I think there is a certain almost, I'll flip the coin and let something else decide, because it falls into this reactive thing. And it is almost, it can be interpreted as, well, I could let this one go. I could let things take their course. But even the whole situation before the coin flip is even reactive. I mean, they've been discussing Rembrandt's The Raising of Lazarus, so that's on his mind already, in discussing with Bella. So there's that sense again that runs through episode after episode, that he is much more interested in chance, experimentation, as reactive as he is creative, which again, I think, yet again chips away at this idea that Hannibal Lecter, the kind of folk myth of Hannibal Lecter that's sort of out there, of the cool psychopath who has grand designs, is again exploded. I think he admires, well, we know he admires grand designs. He admired the silo color chart, for instance, but he is not focused on doing them. And yet at the same time, he seems to, as I say, generate some kind of influence now where other people are, I mean, because it does see, if you look at it literally, if you look at Baltimore literally and you try and somehow squeeze this show out of its metaphorical and symbolic and allegorical schema and into something that is quote unquote naturalistic. Why are suddenly all these people popping up doing these murderous art things? Well, we know it's because Hannibal is currently in the ascendancy. But what I think is really fascinating about these two episodes back to back is Hannibal's in the ascendancy, and then suddenly he's not. Because soon as we crash into the next episode, the 5th episode, and I know we'll get to it, it's like, everything is starting to stretch now. He's at the end of his elastic, and things are. But yeah, it's again what I appreciated about that moment, and is that he is just so reactive, and chance and experimentation and play in the Luciferian sense. It's all,
but it is also profound as well, isn't it? Because he is referring to the metaphysics that he will espouse a little later on with the shattered teacup and whatnot. He believes profoundly in this it's an almost science fiction notion of like quantum reality, like quantum foam, that probabilities play out all over. And that's what his creed absolutely is.
When you get that idea of the reversal of death as a crime more powerful than murder, you're into some very interesting territory. I mean, Jack illustrated it just earlier, but mercy and death being such big components of that scene.
It is very interesting as well, because this is really consistent in his character. I don't know whether it's born here. There's no exploration of it in this regard, whether it's germinated by what he experiences with Bella or whether it's something that he subscribes to beforehand. But later on, he will say, I mean, this is way later on, he will say to Francis Dolarhyde, actually, life is everything. Suicide is the enemy. I'm so glad that you chose life, Francis.
Yeah, and that's interesting, isn't it? Because there's death is the cure for the horrors of life, if you like. Where, I mean, if the Hannibal Lucifer link is going to stand, then that's in opposition to God. But of course, God forbids suicide, as we know. To kill yourself is to deny His glory and the world He created, and all that. But Lucifer is, as Hannibal, very much realizes we're no longer in the garden any longer. We've been cast out. But it's interesting how when he starts talking about to Bella, and I know it can come across as just skirting with platitude, the idea of death as a means to give shape to life. But it's a very secular idealism. So it's very complex now suddenly. It's like the Lucifer character is espousing a secular idealism, but is also ranged against the idea of suicide, as would God be. It's also as close.
Yeah, it's also as close as he comes to espousing anything like an ideology as well. A clear motivating factor, which is this discussion he had with Bella when he says death lends a contrast to life for me. The imminence, the knowledge of the perpetual imminence of my death means that I'm able to appreciate everything. I can appreciate every aspect of life in all of its beauty and horror. And to him, again, it's this notion that he draws no distinction. He is just consumptive. That's what existence is for him.
It's purely aesthetic as well.
It's play, it's art. That's what existence is to him.
His morality, his ideology, his metaphysics, it all boils down to aesthetics. It all boils down to the aesthetics of experience.
Absolutely, and it's so intriguing, isn't it? It's
not a non sequitur either, because it's set up in the first part of the episode where Will is talking to Beverly, and he says, there is no reason beside amusement and curiosity, which is his attempt to get at the same thing, essentially, to describe the phenomenon that Hannibal then self-describes.
That's it. I mean, the difference between them is that Will, ironically, has contempt for that. Will has contempt for that. He doesn't see the worth in it. He sees it as petty and mean and cruel, whereas Hannibal sees it as absolute. He doesn't see how any other position can have primacy over that. It is everything and all. It is the very basis of his existence. And again, you get this interesting thing happening here. You've got cross-pollination happening between Will and Hannibal, obviously, and that's happening a lot. But Will is growing into his own peculiar kind of monster as a result of his experiences. And the funny thing about them is that Hannibal is the more attractive of the two. Despite everything he does, even given this, Hannibal is the more attractive of the two.
Will is getting to the same place through morality, isn't he? He's getting to be an amoral killer, as we see in the next episode, via what he feels anyway, what he experiences as moral concern, what he experiences as empathy. He experiences it as, righteous rage, and that's why wrath is a sin, because it leads to things.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because again, you get this romanticism bleeding in, you get Blake bleeding in, and it's something that Hannibal seems to see in Will. He sees this fiery creation, this painted man who is he's masquerading as human almost, or he's trapped or trammeled in human skin, but is so much more than that if he would just allow himself to be. And of course we're getting the seeds of it now very naturalistically. It's not something I don't think the writers have in mind. It's just happening. It's just something that is bleeding through, and it's all of this imagery and these influences will come to germinate and flower in the third season, of course, where will be cast as Christ, as the Lamb, as both more beautiful and more terrible than Hannibal's Lucifer.
And of course, Gideon in the next episode, he is highly perceptive. He is the first to be talking about, well, explicitly anyway, about Will as being a creature in the process of transformation. And I guess because he is the sort of, roughly speaking, Hannibal avatar, or or doppelganger, or distorted reflection, so he can articulate that which Hannibal will hold closer to his chest for longer.
I suppose also Gideon's been through it, hasn't he? I mean, he's been his whole shtick is that his personality has been ripped apart,
which of course so has Will's. I mean,
of course,
Will's brain has gone to mush and had to be reconstructed, and Gideon's has not been in such a biological way, a biochemical way, but he has been so manipulated, and so much distortion has been placed on what he thinks is actually happening, that they are sort of cousins under the skin for a moment. He stops, and of course they are. I mean, Will is as well. Will is as another distorted reflection of Hannibal, but you start to see the similarities now via Gideon, which is
exactly. And I think the big difference is, of course, Will has way more agency. Gideon isn't really, but Will is definitely an alternative and sometimes competing narrator or author.
Well, it feels interesting that Abel Gideon is presented almost as yesterday's man, both metatextually and within the text, because he's meant to be, of course, that Brian Cox version of Hannibal, so he's almost fading away, and Will is in the point of coming to, and Hannibal as at the moment is kind of the status quo, because he is outside, he is having direct agency and effect on things, but it's in flux, because I say in the next episode we start to see that the Hannibal grip on reality, or the grip on the pen, if we want to keep that sort of textual metaphor going, is starting to weaken.
It's interesting. I would have kind of said the opposite about Gideon in this section of this series. For me, he's starting to come into focus as a person in his own right. In that episode, he becomes a self-acting agent, really, for the first time. He does things like talk to Alana and tell her what Will's up to, entirely off his own bat and for his own reasons. He seems to genuinely like Alana. He seems to genuinely feel bad about the fact that he was going to kill her, and et cetera, et cetera. And whatever you think about the depth of those feelings, they are at least his. He's starting to be a person in his own right again. He's starting to sort of construct Abel Gideon again out of the wreckage that's been left behind by everybody else playing around with the pieces.
I agree with that. I just think that there's a sense, and I don't know if it's because obviously we're coming back to this, having seen it once already, but there's just a sense that even as he comes into focus, it's almost rather like how someone rallies before death. He does seem like a man who's the clock is ticking down on.
Well, yes, and of course you do get that visit,
even though you
Hannibal,
have got
don't you?
Yeah.
And it is,
love
in a
the
way,
comment he makes him. I'm a cutter, not a pisser.
no, I'm a cutter, not a pisser. Yeah, but that visit is a marker, isn't it? I mean, there's a subtext of communication happening there, because Abel Gideon knows who Hannibal is. He knows that he's the Chesapeake Ripper. He's been in his house. He's seen what he does. He's heard him overtly confess, basically. And Hannibal is aware of that. And of course, Abel Gideon is terribly intimidated and afraid of Hannibal. I mean, he has that great. He basically he defines Hannibal, which is nothing that anybody else can do. None of the psychiatrists, none of the profilers, none of them can do this. But he calls him. He's the devil. Smoke. You can't catch him.
It seems to be two things as well. There seems to be two moments in this episode. That was one of them, and one or both of you might correct me here, because I could be wrong on this, but is this the first episode in which the confirmation or realization of Hannibal's cannibalism is actually expressed in dialogue? I know it's been expressed in images.
I think it is, because it is.
Yeah, and that's simultaneous with Will's realization. Because this is the episode in which Will realizes for the first time that Hannibal is both the copycat and the Chesapeake Ripper. And then he immediately in reference, and then Beverly then asks about, what's he doing with the bits, and it immediately slots into place for Will. So in that one scene, you have the payoff, the culmination of this gigantic running thread.
Absolutely. We're almost exactly halfway through the entire thing, aren't we? I mean, we're almost halfway through series 2 of a 3 series. And not that it was intended that way, but it just all seems to fall. This is the top of the rising action.
And it's a great moment as well, isn't it? I mean, I love the way Hugh Dancy plays it, because you do see the revelation happening in his face and in his eyes. The fact, and of course, it's not just that Hannibal's a cannibal; it's the fact that he's made everyone around him
one as well.
Cannibals as well. Oh my goodness! I mean, it's interesting. There's a lot of physical stuff happening with Hugh Dancy in these episodes, as well as he's psychologically transforming and piecing himself back together into
he's
weird
very interesting in this. I mean, it's one of the scenes that really stood out for me was in his chat with Chilton, because it's like, that Chilton cannot help but gloat and let Hannibal in on this. You know what you're doing. He's very. I think he's quite happy to let the peccadillos of the people he guides and manipulates come out as well. I mean, I'm not sure Hannibal is any more or less of a threat just because Chilton's gone to Chilton, but Will knows what he's doing, and he's now, and of course that gives us that extra understanding that the things that have been happening to him are now under control.
Yeah, he has comprehension now. He has memory is very interesting in this episode, and in season 2 in general. I mean, liminal spaces are really starting to take the fore now. So, I mean, this episode opens with Will in his creek. And that creek is going to become very, very significant, because it is, of course, it's the counterpoint to Hannibal's memory palace, and it shows you so much how they are different from one another. I mean, Hannibal is a sentimentalist. Ultimately, he places association on places and on artifacts and on people and meals and art and whatnot, and he wants to keep them. He is something almost desperate and fervent about the way he accumulates.
It's the aesthetic thing that Jack was talking about as well, because what that gives the strong impression of is Hannibal is the civilizer. He's the person who has to go and civilize in his own particular and inimitable way and carve things out of nature, whereas Will is at ease with nature.
In fact, Will is it's so interesting, the fact that he is so at ease in that
it's the fact his house is it's the creek, it's the representations of how he understands Hannibal, but it's also, I think the creek is also interesting because it also acts as a warning, because ultimately, of course, it's almost a guide. This is what you should do. You should fish. Beverly's problem is she went and hunted. She should have fished. She was too driven, and of course that's why it's calamitous.
And of course, the fishing metaphor will come back again and again and again and again in this series, in this season in particular.
Well, the way there's a point in this episode, or it might be the next one, where Hannibal is preparing food, and it looks like he's tying a lure.
Yeah, there's so much of that going on. But it's just fascinating to me what it tells you about these two characters, because of course, in the waking world, which is meaning less and less and less as the show goes on, but in the waking world, Will is the twitchy, disheveled, socially maladjusted character who doesn't really know who he is. And Hannibal is composed and controlled and moves with this incredible fluidity. But their psychological constructs kind of betray something else about them. Will only needs this space. And also, it's a space that, unlike Hannibal's, is not controlled. It's not. It's a river. It's a creek, so it flows away and around him. It's a wild space, so he has no influence over it. Whereas Hannibal's is all architecture. It's all internal spaces. It's so fascinating that I just find that really, really interesting. And it's the fact that these spaces are, to these characters, more real than real. They're more real than real. So Will retreats into his creek because he is in the bowels of hell. He is in the very real hell that Hannibal has delivered him into. And Hannibal says the same a little later on. I think it's in the second half of this series. He will say to Will, if I am ever incarcerated, I'll live in my memory palace. It won't just be construct for remembering things. It will be where I exist.
Yes, it's that significant moment, isn't it, where Will turns down reading material, isn't it? He's offered a book. He says, "No, yes. I don't need it.
I don't need it. No, but he's living it. I mean, again, it's this subtle insinuation that these characters know on some level that they are fictional, or that they're operating in this heightened, abstract world. Of course, Will doesn't need it. He's living his story. He doesn't need it.
And of course, he's been more effective while incarcerated than he has been when actually within the world, being able to roam through it, where he's frequently come across or come up against things which have, he's almost
particularly in this episode, actually. Right. Particularly in 2-4. This is the one where he starts to really become an agent from his prison cell, as it were. It's like a safe space, isn't it? It's more like a bunker or a safe room from which he can operate. And of course, he's operating by manipulating people.
Yep. And everyone, right? He's the spider at the center of the web here.
And he directs them.
He's manipulating Jack. He manipulates Chilton. He manipulates Freddie Lowndes, of course. He is the spider at the center of the web at this point. And it's so interesting that incarcerated, he is now operating from a position of knowledge and power and agency, whereas when he was outside in the space that he was not in control of, he wasn't. He had none of that.
It's
kind of a version of the Rorschach thing, isn't it? I'm not locked in here with you. Whereas with Will, it's I'm not locked away from the world. The world is locked away from me.
Yeah.
There's also that sense of something that that you've talked about and written about, actually, Jack, which is the conceit that's often used in sort of fantasy or horror or science fiction on film or television, where gods or demons are basically like television viewers, and they just sit there and they interact through screens or spaces, and everyone else goes and does the work. And there's this real sense of that here with Will, which this is part of this transcendence, this transformation. Yes, he's incarcerated, but he's more godlike than he has ever been before. But it is that I guess because it's in the nature of television. Television inevitably, or film, they end up using metaphors which fold back on themselves. And so this is, what's going to be the god in television? It's going to be the person who sits in the room, interfacing with characters,
or so directing the plot effectively.
Scenes. Yeah.
Will actually
Directing.
literally starts watching the television show Hannibal at one point in 2.4 because he gets Chilton to give him the memory drug, and then he starts having waking dreams where he starts remembering things. For instance, he remembers what happened the night where he takes Abel to Hannibal, and it's in his deep memory as opposed to his front memory, because of what's been done to him. And the in the dream, the basically the magic formula that he gets Chilton to give him, the magical memory formula, the magical memory potion, it brings it back. And the way it brings it back is as a sort of a tableau that Will watches happening in front of him through the bars of his cage.
Yeah, and he's also external from himself in those memories. He's not looking through the eyes of himself in the memories. He's watching through.
He's watching that scene, but he's watching the unexpurgated version, and it's fascinating to that. It happens again actually because he starts remembering sessions that he had with Hannibal, for instance. Where he sat opposite Hannibal in Hannibal's pad and he draws the clock, etc. He starts remembering those, and he starts remembering the light therapy, etc., etc. And that stuff we weren't privy to when it was happening. We are being given through Will's memory of what's happening. We are being given the director's cut, as it were, of the film we've already seen. We are being given the extra scenes.
Yes, of course. So I mean, and it's a really clever technique for the show to use, of course, because it means that the mystery can be sustained. We don't have an entire view behind the curtain. We don't have that Hitchcockian thing where we know everything and we're just waiting for the bomb under the table to explode. We are finding out as Will is finding out. And so we're getting revelations as the show goes on, which is wonderful. Absolutely wonderful.
And that's so wonderfully eerie, that sequence where Will has that memory about the night at Hannibal's with him and Hannibal and Abel. And I love that Will walks out into the scene and he's walking around looking at the three of them, Hannibal, Abel, and himself in the past. And then the vision of Hannibal that he sees turns and looks at him and talks to him. He addresses Will in the present, current Will, who is watching the memory. And obviously, that is an aesthetic conceit, but at the same time in this show it could mean that Hannibal is accessing Will's dream. It could mean that Hannibal is as aware of this memory being replayed as Will is.
Particularly if you factor in the idea that the memory palace is an external space, almost a sort of internal external space. It's not in Hannibal's mind. It's something that he has. He is that is reified in some way.
So what has actually happened is that Will has he has accessed through a side door, as it were, Hannibal's memory palace.
Yeah, that's exactly it, right? And these liminal spaces increasingly are more real than real, aren't they? They are absolutely places that exist and interact with one another and with waking reality. And it's something that's going to happen more and more and more and more as the show goes on. And then, of course, into season 3, where it goes basically third act of The Shining, where everything just everything to break
when
down.
We were chatting earlier before, just texting, George, about, we were sort of joking about Baltimore, and it's something we've talked about before. This isn't Baltimore. This is.
It's almost like an arbitrary label, isn't it? At this point? The notion is like
it might as well be. If The Wire is Baltimore, this is and you were to make a comparison or a contrast in New York, this is Gotham. It exists in a fold of Baltimore. It's not a real. So we were talking about that, and where was I going with this? That's the problem. But now I can't remember where I was going with it. Oh, it'll come back to me.
It'll come back at some point.
It'll come back. No, it's completely gone. No, there you go.
Oh, no, it is.
My memory palace has just leaked out my ears. I'll relax.
What I find fascinating is, like, in the opening of this episode, in the creek, you have Abigail turning up. And Abigail is so symbolically interesting in this season in particular, season 2. We've talked about this, but all of these characters, every single one of them, experience multiple either symbolic or even actual deaths throughout the course of this show. And each one is a it's a lead up to some sort of metamorphosis, to some sort of emergence or transformation. Abigail is one of the few characters who's been through three of them. She's been through three deaths, and she's suffered what, insofar as we're aware at the moment, an ultimate death. She is a character who is dead to the waking world, but she exists in Will's liminal space. She almost certainly exists in Hannibal's as well. But she turns up as almost like a gatekeeper or a harbinger of things to come. She turns up twice in this series, I think, and this is one of
Alana's quite the harbinger as well.
as well. Yeah, isn't she just? And again, we've seen that this show, when it comes to certainly psychiatrists and therapists, they do have this semi-divinity, don't they? I mean, we've seen Alana revealed before Will as that liquid entity, that semi-divine thing, and that seems to be the case in this show. They're reckless and they are often wrong about things, but they do have this incredible influence over not only other characters, but reality.
Well, I mean, certainly in kind of film and television history as well, the characters who are psychologists, psychiatrists, an awful lot of confidence gets conferred onto them by other characters. They're always made kind of semi-divine anyway, and this just takes it it takes it one step further, does it? Because normally they're almost priestly, aren't they? They have that quality of, like, if it were an Exorcist film, they'd be the priest, wouldn't they? They're the sage, they're the witch doctor, they're the shaman, they're this. Here, they are the demigod. They are the angelic or demonic spirit that is moving through the world and changing things around them. The thing about Alana, and I think it's the thing that Hannibal, he doesn't necessarily find it distasteful about. It's not something he has contempt for her about, but she has this capacity, but does not realize it on any level. He doesn't have any consciousness of it in the same way that Hannibal does, and even Chilton has this consciousness of the fact. It's just that Chilton is inept. If he is any kind of god, it's the god of village idiots. Which is interesting because, that's ambiguous too. Because I think we discussed this in the last episode. He is starting to be one of the first characters. He's one of the first characters who's actually listening to Will. He is one of the very first characters who's actually sitting down and listening to Will, and is actually allowing what he's learning from Will to change his perceptions about things. And he is also becoming one of the first characters who's starting to have doubts about Hannibal Lecter. Yes, yeah.
I mean, I love the complexity of that. I absolutely love the complexity of that. Aesthetically, on the surface, this guy is the comic relief. He is the comic relief. He's slightly camp. He's very queer-coded. He is fairly inept and bumbling and so full of himself. It's lovely when he takes a fall because, you just love to see it from that kind of character. But he is becoming this co-conspirator with Will. And Will is kind of realizing it. Chilton is useful to Will in a way that Alana isn't, and the way that Jack never will be. Alana, again, there's a fair deal of contempt for Alana evoked in the audience in these episodes, I think, because she is so... she says it herself much later on. She does have the line, "I was so blind." And it's like, well, yeah, you are. You absolutely are. It's that almost magical wall all of these characters have in their minds when it comes to Hannibal Lecter. Even though if they took a moment and stepped back and started listening to Will sincerely, they would see the patterns emerging. They would see that, there's definitely something going on.
But it is
here.
classic optics, isn't it? He can hide himself so efficiently, even without all the subterfuge and the work that is required, simply because he's a gentleman in middle age with a good job and a profile, and he's got great taste, and these things conceal people.
Yeah,
and this is why you always, he seemed so
Oh,
such an impressive, and you know,
such
how
a
many
nice
times have we
person.
heard it? How
Yeah.
many times? You know,
You wouldn't
he was a
think it of him,
gentleman.
would
You know, he
you?
had class.
Yeah,
And these are the things that these are the greatest concealers.
absolutely. Yeah, that's what you want to look for. If you're looking for someone who is like an abuser or something to that effect, you look for normality. You look for someone who is painfully normal and generally quite liked in their community. They are not, if they went around, being cartoon caricatures of monsters, then they'd get pegged pretty quickly, wouldn't they?
There's
Yeah, but
another problem
it
that
just taps.
I mean, Alana is not unperceptive. She picks up when she's talking to Will that something's up, that he's planning something, that he's
Oh,
done something. She is not unable to intuit when stuff is going on under the surface. She just can't do it with Hannibal.
no,
And
she just have like
one
she
of
has
the
the
problems
time.
that people have, of course, is that there's no baseline with Hannibal. With Will, you have a baseline normal set of behavior or type of behavior by which you can gauge diversions.
Yes,
Divergences. With Hannibal, there is no baseline normal because the whole thing is artifice. The whole thing is pretense. Nobody has any reading on the sincere Hannibal or the normal Hannibal by which you can gauge divergences from that, because there is no such thing as the sincere Hannibal or the normal Hannibal, because he's fundamentally not human.
exactly. As we've been
So
told many times, it's the skin suit, it's the human suit, isn't it?
the trouble with Alana is that she is doing her job in a professional, rational way, and that's in the real world. That's a perfect. She's professional, she's rational, she's conscientious. In the real world, that's who you want, but
Yes.
she's not equipped to deal with this
for this
situation because that's not how this reality is working.
It's not how this reality works, right? She's like a character plucked up from somewhere else, isn't she?
And that's where all those what seem like aesthetic affectations, like the time lapse and stuff, suddenly carry so much weight, because you realize that is how time sometimes passes in
Absolutely.
this Baltimore.
In this particular world, I mean, at the end of this episode, you effectively have Hannibal being in two places at once. He leaves Bella's bedside after getting a right royal slap and is instantly in his basement. He's instantly in his cellar with Beverly
which
Cat.
he can also be in two places at once because he comes at her from impossible angles.
Right.
And these aren't continuity errors. This is
how it works.
Feeds into the overall.
It's worked like this before.
Logic.
It's worked like this before many, many times. And just on a purely artistic
and of course it extends to Matthew Brown as well. Matthew Brown, who is in the water and then isn't.
And then isn't.
It is part of that whole pattern of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, on a purely aesthetic level, it's just a piece of horror. The sequence where Beverly is in the cellar and you don't know what she's looking at. Just like the films, just like the books, they don't let you get a look of what is going on in Hannibal's cellar in his basement.
Nothing could ever live up to your imagination, could it? And if you saw it, it would be disappointing by definition.
Yes, absolutely it would. You only see her reaction to it and then him framed in the background. And it's like a scene from Hellraiser. There is like dark brick walls, there are hooks on chains, and he moves suddenly because he's naked to her now. The human suit has come off completely.
Yes. Yeah.
He's seeing him in a way that very few people have ever seen him.
This is one of the great coups of having someone like Mads Mikkelsen, not purely because he's a very, very good actor, but he has that background in dance and movement, he deploys it so effectively in that moment because he is signaling to you, skin suits off, guys. This is the real me. This is me in a completely different mode, and he can do that purely through that tremendous control he's got over his own body as an actor, as a performer.
That's it. And Beverly's made the same mistake that Alana makes, which is that she'd come at this like a rational person. Oh, I've got a gun. I'm an FBI agent. I'm trained. He's a doctor. He's nobody. He's this wiry nothing. I can take him. Even if he does come back, I can take him. No. No. And I love the fact it doesn't show you it. You don't see anything. And I really like that decision. I really, really like that decision.
It's absolutely the right decision. Yeah.
Yes,
It is totally the right decision. It would be too brutal for one thing. I mean, you have built up a particular, through Will largely, you've built up a particular relationship with Beverly at this point. You also have this thing with Beverly and Alana again being like fragments or splinters of Clarice Starling. I mean, the sequence in the cellar echoes the sequence at the end of Silence of the Lambs, obviously. It's just that in this instance, this version of Starling actually does become the victim. And
Freddie gets to be a pseudo Clarice actually in 2.5 in the scene where she's taken to see Will, and the orderly guy does the spiel from Silence of the Lambs about if he tries to hand you anything, etc.
Yes, exactly. Yes, yeah. I find again, I know we've discussed it, and I think it's becoming increasingly the case. I just find Freddie Lounge so interesting in this iteration of Harris because I mean she swims in the cesspool of the tittle tattle and the gossip and the sensationalism, but she's almost because she. Freddie Lowndes is the best person to do that. I'd said in a previous podcast how important I find her vegetarianism is to Hannibal's omnivorousness, because neither is hypocritical in the context of the show Hannibal. But sort of both of them are swimming in cesspools, of course. But they're both are oddly equipped for it. And then you get these wonderful moments where the rug is pulled from under your feet, and again it feeds into this idea of. Freddie Lowndes is a far more interesting character in this version than I think is ever presented in the novels or the other films. Totally. As a man, send someone else, Jack. She's one of yours.
Yeah,
that line absolutely stopped
I love
me in
that.
my tracks.
That whole sequence. When she first finds Beverly, and the actress. Oh, it's terrible. I can't remember her name at the moment, but she does something brilliant. He sees it, and she is horrified. You can see in her face that it has completely blasted her, but her first reaction is to take out the camera, and it's not just because she's opportunistic. It's not just because she's a scavenger. No, it's a way of filtering this reality. Yeah, it's a way of putting something in between her and this horror. Getting some control over it.
Yeah.
It's a sequence of a matter of seconds, but it is so good. It's so powerful, and it's all in her. It's all in her because there's no camera movements, there's no special effects, there's nothing. It's just her telling that moment, and it is brilliant.
Yeah, it becomes clear that Freddie is actually a creature of fierce morality.
Yes,
I think.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. It's a real coup how they've worked that character in this. Considering the origins of that character.
Well, considering the origins, because he is in the books, that character, and in the films as well. That character is one of Thomas Harris's great douchebags. They're just there's nothing to them. They are just execrable. And when they do get
a real moment later on where she says again in the second episode in this where I'm glad to find you where you belong, and you're sort of yeah, because we have that extra insight of knowing where Will is going and where Will and again she is insightful. She realizes, she instinctively gets more than she knows. Like, yep, you're kind of right.
She sees him the way that Hannibal does. It's just from a different perspective.
Yeah,
he smells it on him exactly the same way Hannibal does. Because they are both in their different ways creatures of heightened morality, extra human morality.
And of course, once they riff on the sequence from Silence, with the mask and strapped into the gurney. It's like, there it is. It's partly a joke, it's partly a visual pun, but it is pointing to an awful lot that's been going on in the narrative.
Yeah. It's a really clever way to take the Will character, because of course any lesser show would have made it like a redemptive arc. Eventually he'll be exonerated and he'll get out, and then it will all be commiseration, and then we'll get back together and we'll get back on the train again. It will be CSI Baltimore again. But that's not what is happening here. That is not this. There is no redemption for Will, because this Will is different. This Will is something else, or rather, he's not different. He's just revealed himself. Hannibal has forced him to become what he essentially is from the very beginning. And again, it's what Freddy and Hannibal see in him. It just
Although of course that is questionable, because can you be said to truly be a thing if you never become that thing without somebody else influencing you to become?
Yeah, it's a fair point.
Yeah, and actually, Matthew Brown makes the it's done as a kind of throwaway, or again almost as a joke, where he's saying to him, well done, clever you, but you were in the FBI. But really the subtext there is the FBI cocooned your behavior. The FBI provided you with a way to focus what you outside of the FBI. What would you have been? Would you have been already on your way to being a Hannibal-esque character? All that did was provide you with a context by which you could behave in a different way.
Yeah.
So this little throwaway comment of Matthew Brown, who himself is found himself. It's a great conceit. I love the fact that he's in there as an orderly.
He's Barney, isn't he? He is the inverse of Barney. That's what he is. It's this whole fractured reality thing again. You get different versions of Paul Krendler and of Clarice Starling and all the characters that don't.
But it's interesting how quickly they have to deal with Matthew Brown, because he's very interesting in the way that he is. Because again, he comes across as either someone who can grab hold of that meta narrative, or in some way operates like Hannibal in an almost supernatural fashion. But there is certainly in the last sequence where Hannibal's nearly bought it, and this guy is younger, he's fitter, he's brasher. It's like you've really met your match. And it's people Hannibal outside of Hannibal that take care of that. It's not Hannibal.
Completely. Hannibal is actually bested in 2.5. He is taken by surprise at the swimming pool without Abel overhearing what Will says to what's his name? Without Abel repeating to Alana what he's learned.
Yeah.
And Alana then putting two and two together. Hannibal's dead.
Hannibal's absolutely done. He doesn't have any contingency for this. He doesn't anticipate it at all. And in a peculiar way, I imagine he's rather impressed. I imagine it, in the aftermath of this, it's like, good on you, Will. I knew you had it in you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny how quickly this races by. Like I really felt watching these two that I was seeing the stuff I remembered as taking a long time, just racing by in a couple of episodes.
Absolutely. I don't know why. I thought the whole Beverly Cats conspiring with Will and investigating Hannibal thing was much longer than this. Much longer. I thought it expanded over episodes, but it's really contracted, isn't it?
Same with Bella's cancer, same with the orderly subplot. Yeah, he's gone at the end of 2.5. He's dead. It's over. It's like, wow. Shot. I thought this went on and on.
You almost get a sense of the aesthetic choices mirroring the pace, because one of the things that does really strike you about these two episodes is where the hell the score is going. This percussive, pile driving, distracting score. The music in Hannibal has been rather akin to the music in most modern drama. Which it is very incidental. Just synth chords and the occasional electronic timpani drums, and it was nuts in those two episodes. It was like the very that element of the production was sort of breaking up as everything else is breaking up and becoming intrusive and going faster than it should. And in both cases, when the screen pings to black and the first part of the credits go, oh, we're done. I did it on both occasions. It was like that was 50 minutes.
So quick, right? So quick, and it's because there's so much happening, particularly with the core cast. And of course, we get the first symbolic death of Hannibal in this episode, moving him.
Yeah,
this
is what I said.
Closer.
That moment of him being in the ascendancy doesn't actually last very long. We, as I said, he's stretched, and then we see him almost defeated. It's the actions of other people that.
And it's interesting that it's Will that ultimately does it. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, they're locked into having to.
I love the sequence where Will is imagining himself becoming the almost like an aspect of the Wendigo is inside him, where it's coming out of his back. The horns and the antlers are coming out of his back.
Yeah.
'Cause I love that decision, because the obvious one would be to have them coming out of his head, obviously.
Yeah,
But
and
that would
yes, they
make him
don't,
too
yeah.
close to what Hannibal is. This is
was
something else.
really a lot of interesting things going on in that scene as well, because he he falls forward and the spines come out of his back and so on, and then but you also get the bloody wash basin, because Will has been instrumental in getting Beverly killed, because he knows her, and he knows an emphatic "don't go near Hannibal" was likely to be ignored.
Yep.
And so you get this almost like Lady Macbeth moment of not being with the bloody wash basin, but it's also Psycho, of course. It's also The Conversation, the film The Conversation, where Gene Hackman's character imagines, I think it is a sink again, or is it? It's a toilet or something where it's overflowing with blood, and it's a font, of course. We've as you're saying, we're getting a lot of Blake through now. We're getting a lot of Milton. It's a baptism. It's a baptism of him changing into this new thing. Hannibal ends up, of course, being Christ killed and reborn. Will's font floweth over. It's Will's baptism, that moment.
Yeah, we are descending into Blake now. It's getting very, very romantic indeed now. Fittingly enough.
And I thought it was quite, again, it's making fanciful connections, but the Beverly Cat's design, and now I know in part it's a homage to Damien Hirst, of course.
Yeah,
but she also looks like one of Francis Bacon's popes.
Yes, that's what I got.
So
that's what I got. Bacon more than anything.
Yeah, but it's an ironic demise for someone in forensics, of course, to be so neatly bisected and laid out.
I'm sure is very conscious, right? I'm sure that's very, very conscious.
Yeah, but it just took me back to something that we said right at the very start when we were doing our sort of preamble in, which was that curious thing of the 90s, of which Harris's work is so, particularly because of the film adaptation of Silence of the Lambs, so deeply embedded into our cultural understanding of the 90s, where also the art was becoming, obsessed with bloodletting and mutilation.
Yeah.
And there's loads. I said it all the way back in episode 1. There's loads that's been written now about that kind of neo-paganistic underpinning of it all, ahead of the millennium. And now I don't really, to tell you, I don't really know what's become of Hirst in the intervening 30 years. But I know there was the jeweled skull, and there's the dot paintings, and I know that. But the riffing on the 90s stuff in a series that's from the middle 2010s, it really links us back into that whole cluster, that whole explosion of stuff, of which Harris is very much a part in popular culture. That sort of grimdark 90s, mutilation, horror, the body, and it just pings out again once you see her basically being Hirsted.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it has a particular resonance because it is a character we know. This is not like Nameless Victim X. This is someone very significant. It's one of Hannibal's cardinal sins, isn't it? It is what sets Will on his murderous path. I mean, Will just becomes completely righteous, doesn't he? He becomes the wrath of the Lamb, as Hannibal will call him later on.
And it's kind of interesting because actually, really, in narrative terms, where this has taken us, and in terms of representation, is to, it's effectively fridging, and yet it takes on a different quality. You can't ignore that's what it is, and there is again, probably because of the source material that it comes from. This series, which I love, I mean, it does struggle to know what to do with women in some cases, particularly with Alana. And now, we've had this. It almost seems that just as Beverly Katz was coming into her own.
If you take Alana in and of herself, you could almost condemn the show for being misogynist, because she in the show she is quite hateful by the end. She is quite hateful by the end. But you are right; it is very masculine, the show, isn't it? And that may just be as a byproduct,
and yet not straightforwardly masculine, of course, because Fuller's scrambled that.
Absolutely.
For all, understandably, and of course,
I would
he
say
could
that it's
not help but do that. I think, in a sense,
right. When I say masculine, what I mean is it's masculine in the same way that, say, Exquisite Corpse by
Yes.
aka Poppy Z. Bright is,
Yeah,
because it's
yeah.
exploring particular kinds of relationships and power dynamics, which they're more commonly exercised through men, and it's exploring the abuses of that too. I mean, the thing with Beverly Katz is she is yet another woman that Jack Crawford has effectively killed or is delivered into the arms of a serial killer because he sees people as instruments. And Will be
the one woman close
that,
to him who wants to die, he won't let her go.
He won't let her go.
So. Right, he won't let her go. Absolutely, and it is for his own selfish reasons, of course.
Even the names pun,
And that's
they almost rhyme. It's
that's what Bella is trying to get away from more than anything else. She's trying to get away from him. She's trying to get away from having to look at him as she dies.
It's another one of those doublings, isn't it? I mean, because they're very, very, very particular about names. Bedelia gets away from Hannibal. Bella cannot get away from Jack.
Beverly, yeah, absolutely. It is there. It is so there. Yeah, I like that. I really like that. But it is, the women characters are very interesting and will become more so because, of course, we're going to very soon get the Vergers involved.
Yes, of course. Crumbs, I'd forgotten all about the.
Yeah. That's when it. I mean, it kicks.
Wow, that
off.
the one I'm. Yeah.
Off
gosh, that's
when the Vergers turn up.
Yeah.
I mean, this show does more with the Vergers than Harris ever did. And I do applaud it for that. We'll get to it when we get to it.
Completely slipped my mind. Yeah, and now it's
the
all
whole
just had a flood of images.
rewriting of Margot is a good move.
Yeah.
It's a good move because in the book, Margot she is effectively
she's a horrible stereotype in the book.
God, yeah. I mean, the funny thing is, I think it even bizarrely comes from a good place. I think what Harris is trying to do is apologize for the basic transphobic trope of Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs. It's sort of like, we've got a trans character here who is actually they are one of the main characters and they're a vaguely decent person. But it doesn't work because Harris knows all about trans masked femme.
Yeah. It sort of reminds me of when Dickens tried to redress the problem of Fagin and Oliver Twist with Dr. Rhea in Our Mutual Friend, and it's like, oh no, this isn't working because he makes him such a plaster saint.
That's it. I mean, you have to bear in mind, you have to bear in mind this is a straight white guy, an older guy as well in the 1990s, writing a trans character when there was precious little knowledge, even basic knowledge. About trans people generally, and it shows. It really shows. But I can't wait. I can't wait for the Vergers to turn up because that's when it kicks off. It really kicks off, and there's a purity, particularly to Mason Verger, which I love. I'm just
remembering how sort of amazingly he's played as well.
Oh God! By the two actors who play him,
who both play him well. I mean, it's Michael Pitt is the first one I know because I remember him from Boardwalk Empire. I can't remember the name of the second actor who plays.
Can't remember, but I didn't even notice. I'll be honest, I did not notice it was two actors until I actually read about it. It just didn't occur to me for some reason.
I can't remember why Pitt didn't come back. It wasn't just one of those. I've got another job.
No, there was
something a bit more.
There was something a bit more. I can't remember what it was, but
he didn't want to spend all that time under the makeup.
Oh right, was it simple as that? Was it?
Yeah, was that it?
I don't know. It might have been.
I mean, to be fair, that is a prosthetic and a half, isn't it? We sat around and for that amount of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's hurtling towards us, guys. It really is, and that's the second half of season 2. I mean, we are going to get to the point soon where Hannibal basically does Will a solid and basically says, "Aha! He wasn't the Chesapeake Ripper. Look, I have all of these organs and to prove it." Ha ha ha! That's going to happen relatively soon.
Yeah.
But what's interesting about this episode is that it's changed the dynamic of Will's relationship to all of the other characters. So all of them have been operating under the auspices that even if he is a serial killer, he's still basically an innocent one because he's been manipulated, because he has like a problem with his empathy disorder and blah 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 blah. After this, that's not so much the case.
Yeah, you do realise
Well, I
how
love
much of a patsy that Will's been, and now suddenly very much isn't.
Will is actually finding his most useful allies among the people who like him least.
Yes,
Because his most useful
Chilton.
allies by far are Freddie and Chilton.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
and to an extent, Abel Gideon as well.
Yeah.
Who's got no time for him, but is now, in their discourse.
I love that. I mean, part of why Beverly dies, of course, is that she is completely transparent to Hannibal. I mean, that's part of why he does what he does with her, because he's actually making a very cruel riff on being able to see through her.
Right.
Because he can see right through her. In the scene in 2.4 where she's trying to probe him for information, and he just looks at her and it's just like, I know exactly what you're doing. I know. I can practically tell you the conversation you had with Will that led you to the, and then he deliberately leaves her the clue about the stitches. You have to look under the skin, etc.
Mm-hmm.
He knows perfectly well what she's doing. The contrast with Chilton is very instructive, because you would think of Chilton as being, very ill-equipped to try anything of the same, but actually Chilton manages Hannibal much better than Beverly. In a scene in the same episode where Chilton is managing the having to tell Hannibal that he can't see Will anymore, Chilton handles Hannibal in that scene brilliantly. He leaves. I think he actually leaves Hannibal confused about what's going on at the end of that scene.
He draws conspiracy with him as well, doesn't he? Like, he does this brilliant thing where he's like,
that's what he does to cloud. He clouds the waters by pretending that what he's doing is trying to help Hannibal cover up, so that Hannibal will help him cover up. And that's actually incredibly clever.
It is really clever, because what he's actually doing there is he's playing into Hannibal's preconceptions of who he is, or who he thinks Chilton is.
And Will doesn't get that either, because Will is sort of peeved with him because he spoke to Hannibal about Will, because he thinks you've broken our agreement. What he doesn't realize is that Chilton doesn't even set him right either, because he just doesn't care what Will thinks. Chilton did that precisely in order to make what's going on invisible to Hannibal. He understood what Will didn't. Will didn't understand that if Chilton just drew down the iron door, said you can't see Will anymore, Hannibal would know that something was going on between Chilton and Will. Yeah. The way Chilton does it, by making it look like Chilton is trying to cover stuff up, and and you have to help me cover stuff up, Hannibal, because I can help you cover stuff up. He leaves Hannibal mystified. Yeah. He does really well in that episode.
It has more the ring of truth about it, the kind of thing you would expect from Chilton. And which is also amazing self-awareness on Chilton's part. He understands himself. He understands his own shortcomings enough to know how to use them effectively.
Some shitty people are very blessed in that if they have self-knowledge. If you're a shitty person and you know that you're a shitty person, you've got a real advantage. Yeah, you can work with most shitty people think they're great, but you do occasionally meet a shitty person who understands, I'm a shit and I don't care. John is one of those. And as such, he's in a very advantageous position.
Yeah, I never pegged actually that in that sequence that he is being astronomically clever, and he's again one of the very, very few characters in the entire show who actually manages to befuddle Hannibal a little bit, because none of the others manage it. I mean, Will obviously does at some point, but none of the others. I mean, people like Beverly and Jack and Bella, they're all completely transparent to Hannibal. He knows everything about them from the first meeting, and he knows exactly what to do to manipulate them and move them around his little game board. But not so much Chilton.
In this episode, anyway.
At least in this episode. I mean, that will change a little later on. I mean, he will,
Well, Hannibal gets his revenge, doesn't he? He very much gets his revenge.
Well, it's almost like having been the klutz or the buffoon. Actually, what Chilton's been revealed as is something more akin to a Shakespearean fool, and even the smart characters in Shakespearean tragedies cannot grasp the fools. They're like,
Yeah.
they're so they're like mist. You can't get hold of them. So you all invariably end up in well, and some of the comedies and in the tragedies as well, with particularly Lear, where intelligent people are coming up against them and not getting what they're
And not
talking
getting
about.
what they, yeah. Of course, the Fool in Lear. In fact, the Fool in Lear is a really good analog for Chilton, or vice versa. It really does work. I just love the performance as well. I mean, just on a purely aesthetic level, Chilton has got to be
He's
one of my
great.
favorite characters. He is just brilliant. I love him. Two bits. It's that right side of slime, isn't
Yeah.
it? Where if it were just a little bit more, it wouldn't work. But it's just perfectly pitched. Perfectly pitched. You'd want Chilton in a sitcom. If you would want a little sitcom about Chilton and his domestic life, wouldn't you?
Yeah. It's funny. You're watching it, and I think you're just saying Shakespeare. They're the perfect cast for Hamlet. Actually, with Will as Hamlet.
Yeah, actually,
that's the play. I mean, Hamlet's not even one of my favorite Shakespeare plays either. But it's just, of all of them, I think that's the one you guys have got to do.
It kind of fits, doesn't it? Yeah, I can definitely see the actors in particular roles in Hamlet.
Yeah.
Although
my appreciation for Hamlet has risen massively recently, because as per Jack, I was rereading Fintan O'Toole's Shakespeare is Hard, but So is Life, and it's good criticism. When you get good criticism, it just absolutely raises something up for you, which you've been a bit sort of like, oh, it's that thing, and then you're like, oh,
when it reveals something about the subject. Yeah, absolutely.
Really revealing criticism, or whatever, critique, and you're like, wow, yeah. That's the stuff.
But no, I mean, like, it's a pause for breath couple of episodes, because it's gonna really hurtle on from this point on, I'm telling you. Now that Will has been revealed to much of the cast as something other than what they thought he was, it's really going to start hurtling forward now. Well, before we know it, we're going to be at season 3. Before we know it. Can't wait.
I was going to say, with the ones we just watched, is that not hurtling then? Is the hurtling yet to start?
They are, but
because
just wait. I mean, my God.
But then I have a memory of that. I have a memory of, because this is only my second time through, but of it being kind of CSI Baltimore-y for a while, and then certain threads, and then it absolutely galloping.
Yeah. And not stopping, right? Just not stopping for a second. We also have
pace on series 3 very interesting, because I like season 3 a lot from that one viewing, but it's very much got its own.
Oh, it's totally time. It's a different entity.
Yeah,
season 3
really is
very different project and a very different entity, and I can sort of see people coming to it and not liking it. I really can, because it is so different from the previous 2 seasons. Personally, it's my favorite. I think it's absolutely wonderful, because it does everything I like.
I've seen it once, but
right. So this is going to be.
Although I remember it slowed us down. It's very. I mean, God, one wants to avoid making culinary similes, but it is like a too
it is called
rich
Hannibal
a meal.
Digested, so go for it.
It is like too rich a meal, because I find with Hannibal, although it is, I mean, one of the best series one of the best pieces of television I've ever seen. I kind of like the pace we're recording at, because it is not something that I find easy to watch just week to week to week to week, or in blocks of episodes. And I remember when I did the third season the first time round, when we watched it together, we could let anything up to 3 weeks or a month elapse between episodes, and then the hit of it was really something. But it was even so with this mid-season 2 stuff, because it's been a few weeks since I've actually sat down to watch one. It was like, this is a really like good hit I'm getting off this, and I don't know. I've never watched it in. I don't know if it would necessarily sort of spoil the sensation to have too much of a good thing in a compressed space of time. I do actually like eking this show out, to be honest.
I mean, not for me. I have watched it like all in one bloody go in like a span of days. It's ridiculous.
You see, you're very for a
I
slight
do get
fella.
it.
You can eat the big banquet and it doesn't affect you, obviously.
definitely. And season 3 is definitely definitely the desserts. You know, it's so rich and decadent and what I love about it. I mean, this is it's kind of a spoiler in a way, but it is a fairy tale. And Hannibal, even there is a sequence in the first episode of season 3 where Hannibal looks at the screen. He's talking to the audience and says, "Let it be a fairy tale then." And it's almost like curtains part. And it's like, okay, all bets are off. All the rules have been thrown out. You
can actually see how they could have almost done that Francis Urquhart thing of having him as a conceit. I mean, I think it's better that they didn't. But you could definitely see how that could still possibly work within the
it could be like
context of the show. He seizes control like that.
I have no doubt that would have been a discussion when this show was being formulated. Do we have Hannibal narrating it, in his head? But I imagine one of the reasons they didn't is because Dexter does that, and this show is. Yeah, Dexter has that a lot, and it's annoying.
It's amazing how many shows I've not seen, and it was something I was talking about with one of my family. I said I think it's also slightly the curse of getting older as well. I said because we've experienced such a shift in the way that television is consumed and engaged with. So now whereas you had that kind of ritualistic. This is on at this time in this schedule, and you're either available for it or I mean, we had I mean, we did have video recorders and stuff. I guess you had a chance if you time it on the wretched thing.
If it ever worked, yes.
But now, because I've had attempts at some of the streaming services, a free subscription here, a trial there, and there's nothing for someone who's my age more disconcerting than being presented with a series of tiles which have like a photograph on them and not even so much as a blur. I have no map and compass for getting through these things. So it's like I don't know if I'm missing another Hannibal. I don't know if I'm missing good stuff, but I simply can't find my way through this, and I'm not going to engage with something haphazardly. Because it's why would I invest in 2 episodes of something and it turns out to be an absolute pile?
And it turns out to be a dog.
It's like the majority of it will be because obviously television needs programs more than ever because there's so much of it. So the idea that quality is sustained is going to be a hard one to believe, certainly in this era of culture as well. But so it's a completely different beast.
Yeah, it's nice to know it exists, isn't it? But again, it's that annoying thing of it being a high watermark, right? It's like, for me, it's very much like Clive Barker. It ruins you.
Because I knew of things like I've heard of things like Dexter. I've heard of things the stuff that was around Hannibal at the time, like Pushing Daisies, Dexter, this, that, and the other. I never engaged with that. I never watched them.
Dexter's frothy. Dexter. I mean, if Hannibal is the finest porny sport, then Dexter is it's a frothy latte milkshake basically. Right. It's got no insight whatsoever. It's the kind of thing where
unlikely that there would be other shows out there which would pull this almost happy accident that Hannibal is.
Dexter is not one of them. Dexter's just like, it's light, it's a soap opera. It's a soap opera with serial killers in it. That is basically it.
Right.
It can be fun, it can be engaging at times, but it's not. It doesn't want to say anything. It doesn't really want to do anything. It has no insight or anything.
The fear, of course, is that I'll just slip out of phase with everything contemporary because I mean, my viewing is about going back to stuff. And in fact, an awful lot of my reading is about going back to stuff, and you think, my gosh, obviously I'm at that point where I've got a stockpile of stuff that I've built up just by dint of having lived and having experienced things, and And of course, it's very hard for new stuff to get in because it's got a lot to challenge. You know,
Of
it's got
course.
the big challenges of the things that you have curated, so to speak, and it's very hard for new stuff to get it. But
I think
it's also,
so. I mean,
I just don't know where to
find-
start with it.
I find personally that a lot of the time it's other forms of media that do it. So video games, for example, which I enjoy a great deal. There's amazing stuff being done in newer video games. There's stuff that's never been done before, and I don't just mean technically. I mean narratively. I mean aesthetically. You know.
But it always feels as well, because I mean I'm on the outside looking in when it comes to video gaming, but it also seems like an art form that's been in a long period of gestation. It's like been a long puberty, and now it's just getting to the point where it's sort of like it's symbolically in its 20s or something.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a long way. Whereas a lot of the other art forms and bits of popular culture are now like toothless in a way. I mean, music. I mean, music is now so tamed as a cultural phenomenon. I mean, any revolutionary power it had went decades ago.
Yeah, that's largely as a result of capitalism, isn't it?
Yeah, of course. It's been ring fenced in that way, but now again, it's to do with its distribution. As I was saying about streaming services for television and film, the way music is distributed it's taken its power away from it. Yet at the same time, there's there's a tremendously democratizing factor of it, which is we used to pay a lot for physical media, and particularly our generation, because we paid for it several times because of the shifts. There were records, then there were tapes, then there were DVDs, there were CDs, and you look back at that time thinking with an awareness of things like inflation, and remembering at some point in the late 90s putting down like, I don't know, $13.99 for an album or a film, and you're thinking, my God, that's ludicrous. Now, when you make the calculation, when you do the maths in your head, you get, that's a lot of money.
Yeah.
But of course, it meant you could only, quote unquote, curate so much. Now we've got such a surplus of it.
That's part of the problem, isn't it? You have this. It's an embarrassment of not always riches,
And I wonder how much it actually cuts into because obviously our cultural choices, the cultural artifacts we engage with, create parts of our identity, our aesthetic identity. And when there's such a glut of it, how you can almost in some respects lose a sense of you lose your moorings a bit, because I was very sure as a younger person in the 90s what my aesthetic was, what my choices were, and then as the distribution exploded and the event horizons got faster and the sheer amount of material that was needed became multiplied, it's almost like having this continual sort of like, where am I in all this? It's like being crushed in the post-industrial nowness, isn't it, all the time? And I think the strangest thing ever is just to be hook onto a streaming site, and just look at a bunch of tiles and go, I have no idea what any of this is.
No idea.
And therefore I cannot make a selection.
Yeah, it is a problem. It is a problem. And of course, you're paralyzed by the choice. That's part of the problem too. You just lack the processing power half the time too.
Yeah. And you can't, decide I want to engage with something and then realize that for the next hour you're going to be scrolling through tiles, and then you're just losing all sense of where you were with it, and because the sociological damage, because we know that sociologically, when we found bits of culture and we found people that were connected, whether that was something like horror fiction or a particular genre of music or fan culture or something like that. So you had discourse and you had ways of finding, and you could make the links, and then there were recommends, and then people were kind of each other's search engines, really. That has become much more difficult now. I mean, firstly, I think as you get older and you get into middle age, you are somewhat more atomized anyway. I mean, no one has a scene or a group or quite like you do when you're young, because you're either bound together by something like university or school or some kind of social scene. Where then everyone goes off. Obviously, they get locked away in their concrete boxes and
their domestic
start reproducing and whatever. Who's touching people. So it's it's a real miasma now. It's like so. I think I ended up picking up on a couple of recommends that Jack made last week. I think you would watch Reanimator. And I went, I'm going to watch Reanimator because I'd only just read the original Lovecraft to Vicky.
The Herbert West Reanimator.
Yeah, Herbert. Yeah, I thought, let's watch the mid-80s film, and I haven't seen it in decades. And then there was the Dario Argento film that you. I went, I haven't seen that. So I find it, because it's been so long since I've seen both those things, so very long.
So it's basically like watching them with new eyes. Yeah,
but I basically had, if it wasn't for Jack dropping those 2 jewels in a message, I was like, I would have been really stuck because
Reanimator's fabulous. I mean, it is just such a fun film. I mean, it is not the original Lovecraft, like tonally anyway, not by any shape or measure. I'm sure.
Although ironically, in some ways, it is.
Because on this rewatch, I was surprised by how faithful it is. Actually, I mean, it's not an adaptation. And the funny thing is, I also watched the direct sequel, Bride of Reanimator, which is also a very good film actually, and that kind of also sticks 2 elements from the original story as well, because at the beginning of that they've gone and they're in this civil war in Peru or whatever, using the bodies of soldiers that they're treating, and that's a direct, like one of the segments of the original story begins and they're off in the First World War, and they joined up so that they could have access to the bodies of soldiers. Right. So it is still kind of following it to an extent. Anyway,
the logic of trying to approach something like Lovecraft's original Reanimator, it's a bit like the logic that you need to approach someone like Kafka, which is that they are sort of like surreal skits. They're surreal extended. I mean, I think you had even said once before, Jack, that really the understanding to something like Kafka's America is basically it's a Marx Brothers film, and it's like, it is. It's exactly what it is. It's Duck Soup, or The Castle, or whatever. And it's the same with it, because
they're writing in variations of the same tradition of zany Jewish storytelling.
Yes, it's zany Jewish storytelling, and watching Reanimator off the back of because I thought, that's a great coincidence. I've been going through Lovecraft with Vic. We did some M.R. James, we did some Aikman, and we did some other things. And I thought, we'll dip into some Lovecraft.
I'll have to get you on for a Lovecraft retrospective.
Oh, great!
In that case, definitely.
And then, as soon as Jack said in a message, I've just rewatched. I was like, yes, okay, that's too much of a coincidence to ignore, and I had a great time with it.
It's a glorious film. It's just so. I mean, the effects are amazing. The effects are absolutely incredible.
Though I did watch it grayscale, but I did read that the director of photography had every intention of wanting it, and it was just commercial,
really?
Standard commercial.
I did not know that.
No, we're not doing that. There's 2 films I've rewatched recently where, funnily enough, both their directors' photography said these should be in black and white, and of course the commercial reason. One was Reanimator, and the other is Life Force, which I watched on the weekend. I haven't seen that in many years. So I watched both in black and white, and it's like, whoa! The end sequences of Life Force in black and white are incredible.
I can imagine.
They're just so good. So I had good fun. But again, I've gone back to things I haven't seen in years in order to have a good time. Vicky had never seen Life Force, and her commentary was hilarious.
I can imagine, because it's an eccentric film, isn't it?
Well, she basically said, I've just watched 4 films in one. I said, yes. That's like the biggest Frankenstein's monster of a film. I said, yep. She said, how was this made? I said, yep, there's another.
Yeah, that's the correct reaction. Mr. Life Force, that is the correct reaction. I love it. Well, guys, this is as per usual. This has been fantastic.
Sorry, I went off on a big tangent.
No, this is all going in.
Just
This is
about,
all
it's
going
just
in.
my middle-age angst. That's all you
It's
get at the
all
end of one of
going in.
these. It's like,
It's all.
I don't
it's good
understand the
content.
modern world. I don't get
it's-
how streaming services work, and I'm
It's
going to get my
all good
cocoa and
stuff.
go to bed.
It's all good stuff. But as per usual, before we go, is there anything that you guys would like to pimp out?
Well, I mean, only the usual with me. If anyone is still yet to be sick of my voice, there's new audiobooks coming out all the time. I seem to be back on narrating more than producing. It ebbs and flows like that. But just if you pop into Audible or one of the other horrible monsters of modern capitalism, the one that named itself after a rainforest, then and you put in Elliot Chapman, you might turn up some things. There you go. That's my bit of pimping.
Excellent.
As interesting as your guys.
As for me, I'm at Times Carcass on Blue Sky. I have a Patreon where you can get advanced access to everything and anything that I might do. Not been all that publicly productive lately, but I do. I create audiobooks. I read things like classic political texts and short stories that I like, and I occasionally write essays and things like that. But the main thing is the I Don't Speak German podcast with Daniel Harper, which is might not look like it at the moment, but it is back. So check that one out.
Excellent. Links below to all of that, by the way, guys. As for myself, you can find me here on Exaggerated Elegy. Lots going on over here at the moment. Discussions like this, video game let's plays, and whatever I feel like doing, basically. If you want to read any of my short stories of my published fiction, if you go to strangeplaygrounds.com, you'll find links to all of my collections and all of the anthologies that have been published in over there. Again, if you go over to the Evil Empire of Amazon and type in George Daniel Lee, you'll find all of my stuff on my author's page. Over at Ginger Nuts of Horror, I'm currently doing the My Life in Horror series of articles, which there's a couple of those coming up very, very soon. Again, Arrow Films, if you go over there and look for the Hellraiser UHD and Blu-ray set, The Quartet of Torment, myself and Kit Power are on the Hellbound disc on the featurette Hell is What They Wanted. It's an hour and 40 minutes chat about Hellraiser and Clive Barker and queer fiction in horror and all sorts of stuff. And we're very, very proud of it. Guys, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. And we'll be back very, very soon with the next unpronounceable episodes of Hannibal Series 2. Bye-bye.
Bye.